Sophia stood in the courtroom, her heart pounding as the woman who had ruined her marriage smirked from across the aisle. Olivia, her husband's mistress, stood tall and confident, mocking Sophia with every glance. The judge had not yet arrived, but Olivia whispered to her attorney, laughing as if the outcome was already decided. "This is ridiculous," Olivia sneered. "She is just a bitter wife who cannot accept the truth." Sophia clenched her fists, fighting back tears. She had come seeking justice, but it seemed the world was against her. Then the judge walked in, and everything changed. Sophia Carter never imagined that her life would come to this moment. Standing in a courtroom, facing the woman who had shattered her marriage. For 10 years, she had been the devoted wife of Daniel Carter, a successful businessman. Their life together had not been perfect, but she had believed in their love, in the vows they had exchanged. That illusion had come crashing down 6 months ago when she discovered the affair. The betrayal had been brutal, made worse by Daniel's unapologetic confession. He had fallen in love with Olivia Reynolds, a woman nearly a decade younger than Sophia. When Sophia had asked him if their marriage meant anything, he had simply said, "It did once, but things change." And just like that, her world had shattered. She had tried to move on, tried to pick up the pieces of her broken life, but Olivia had made sure she never got the chance. The woman had flaunted the affair publicly, posting pictures with Daniel, wearing the same jewelry he had once given Sophia. The humiliation had been relentless. Then, to add insult to injury, Olivia had sued Sophia, claiming that she had harassed her. The irony was unbearable. Sophia had barely spoken a word to Olivia since the truth had come out. She had left Daniel without causing a scene, choosing dignity over anger. Yet here she was, being accused of stalking, defamation, and emotional distress. She sat at the defendant's table, her attorney, Michael Hastings, beside her. He was an experienced lawyer, calm and collected, but even he had admitted that this case was unusual. "The evidence they have is weak, but they are hoping the public's perception will work against you," Michael had told her before the hearing. "Stay strong. The truth will come out." Now, as the courtroom filled with murmurs, Sophia could feel Olivia's eyes on her. The other woman sat with perfect posture, dressed elegantly in a designer suit, her red lips curled into a smirk. It was as if she were enjoying every second of Sophia's misery. The judge, an older woman named Evelyn Monroe, finally entered, and the room fell silent. "Court is now in session," the bailiff announced. Judge Monroe glanced at the case file before shifting her sharp gaze toward Olivia's attorney. "Mr. Langston, you may proceed." The tall, polished lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client, Miss Olivia Reynolds, has endured months of harassment from Mrs. Carter. She has received threatening emails, unwanted visits, and damaging public accusations that have tarnished her reputation. My client is here today seeking justice." Sophia felt her hands tighten into fists under the table. None of this was true. She had never sent an email, never confronted Olivia, never spoken ill of her publicly. Michael stood, adjusting his glasses. "Your Honor, we dispute these claims entirely. My client has had no contact with Miss Reynolds outside of legal proceedings related to her divorce. We believe this lawsuit is nothing more than an attempt to humiliate Mrs. Carter and to deflect from Miss Reynolds' own actions." Olivia scoffed loudly, crossing her arms. "That is a lie." Judge Monroe shot her a warning glance. "Miss Reynolds, you will remain silent unless addressed." Sophia swallowed hard, watching as Olivia's lawyer pulled out a stack of documents. "We have collected evidence," Langston continued. "Emails from an anonymous account, messages filled with vile threats. My client has also been followed on multiple occasions, which has left her in fear for her safety." Sophia turned to Michael, whispering, "This is absurd. I have never sent her anything." Michael nodded slightly, his expression calm. "Let them talk. We will respond." Judge Monroe glanced at the documents before setting them down. "We will examine the evidence, but I want to hear from the plaintiff first." Olivia stood dramatically, as if she were a victim of great suffering. "Your Honor, I have tried to move on with my life, But Sophia will not let me. I have received messages saying I should watch my back, that I will pay for what I did. I see her car outside my apartment. I have seen her at restaurants, just watching me. Sophia's mouth fell open in shock. That is not true. Judge Monroe raised a hand. Mrs. Carter, you will have your turn. Sophia felt her cheeks burn, but she forced herself to stay silent. Olivia had mastered the art of deception, playing the role of the innocent victim flawlessly. Langston continued, we also have a witness, Daniel Carter, who can testify that his ex-wife has been obsessive since their separation. At that moment, the doors to the courtroom opened, and Daniel walked in. Sophia felt the air leave her lungs. Her ex-husband was as polished as ever, dressed in a tailored suit, his hair neatly styled. He barely looked at her as he made his way to the witness stand. Daniel took his oath before Langston approached him. Mr. Carter, can you describe your ex-wife's behavior after your separation? Daniel exhaled, looking uncomfortable but prepared. She did not take it well. At first, she seemed calm, but then she started showing up in places I was. At Olivia's apartment, at my office. She sent messages, asking me to reconsider. I tried to be patient, but it became overwhelming. Sophia could barely breathe. How could he do this? He knew she had done none of this. Michael stood. Your Honor, if I may cross-examine? Judge Monroe nodded. Proceed. Michael walked toward Daniel. Mr. Carter, are you absolutely certain that your ex-wife sent those messages? Daniel hesitated for a fraction of a second. Yes. Do you have proof that the messages came from her? Daniel shifted uncomfortably. They were from an anonymous account, but the language. So, to be clear, Michael said, his voice unwavering, you do not have concrete proof that she wrote them? Daniel glanced at Olivia, then back at Michael. I believe she did. Michael turned to the judge. Your Honor, we request a full investigation into these claims, including a forensic analysis of the emails. If my client is being accused, we want verification that she was the one behind them. A flicker of unease passed through Olivia's expression. Judge Monroe nodded. That is a reasonable request. Michael continued, furthermore, we have our own evidence to present. Proof that this case is built on lies. A murmur ran through the courtroom. Sophia dared to hope. For the first time since this nightmare began, she saw a shift in the tide. Judge Monroe leaned forward. Mr. Hastings, you may present your evidence. Michael nodded and turned to Sophia. Do not worry, he whispered. The truth is about to come out. Sophia sat frozen in her seat as Michael retrieved a folder from his briefcase. Across the courtroom, Olivia's smug expression wavered slightly, but she quickly composed herself. Daniel, however, shifted in his chair, his hands clasped tightly together. Michael turned to the judge. Your Honor, we have evidence that suggests Miss Reynolds has fabricated this entire case in an attempt to slander my client. Judge Monroe adjusted her glasses. Proceed. Michael held up a stack of printed documents. We have conducted a preliminary investigation into the emails Miss Reynolds claims to have received from my client. Our expert analyzed the metadata and discovered something interesting. The messages did not originate from Mrs. Carter's devices. A hush fell over the courtroom. Olivia's lawyer, Langston, frowned. That does not mean she did not send them through another means. Michael smiled. I am glad you said that, Mr. Langston, because what we did find was far more revealing. He handed a set of documents to the judge. Your Honor, these emails were sent from an IP address linked directly to Miss Reynolds' home network. Gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. Olivia sent the emails to herself? Judge Monroe looked at Olivia with sharp eyes. Miss Reynolds, do you have an explanation for this? Olivia's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her confidence flickered, but she quickly forced a laugh. That is ridiculous. Anyone could have used my Wi-Fi. Michael did not let up. It is possible, but unlikely. We also traced the timestamps. The emails were sent during times when Miss Reynolds was home alone, according to surveillance footage from her apartment complex. Daniel stiffened, glancing at Olivia. The confidence he had walked in with was fading fast. Langston, clearly trying to recover, said, "Your Honor, even if there is some confusion regarding the emails, my client still has the right to feel unsafe. She has seen Mrs. Carter near her home and workplace on multiple occasions." Michael remained composed. "And we can explain that as well." He turned to Sophia, giving her a reassuring nod before addressing the court. "Your Honor, my client works as a freelance consultant, which requires her to meet with clients in various locations. Coincidental proximity to Miss Reynolds does not equate to stalking. However, since Miss Reynolds insists that my client has been following her, we decided to investigate further." Michael walked over to the evidence table and pulled out a stack of photographs. "We obtained surveillance footage from multiple locations where Miss Reynolds claims Mrs. Carter was watching her. What we found is quite telling." He held up a printed image for the judge. "Miss Reynolds, do you recognize this?" Michael asked, turning to Olivia. She hesitated. It is me having dinner at a restaurant." Michael nodded. "Yes, and if you look closely, you will notice the timestamp at the bottom." He turned to Sophia. "Mrs. Carter, do you recognize this date and time?" Sophia leaned forward and examined the image. She felt a jolt of recognition. "I was out of town that day. I had a business meeting in Chicago." Michael turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, we have receipts, flight records, and witness testimony confirming that my client was nowhere near this location on the evening in question. Yet, Miss Reynolds insisted that Mrs. Carter was watching her from a nearby table." The tension in the courtroom grew thick. Judge Monroe's face remained impassive, but her eyes were sharp as they moved between Olivia and Langston. Langston's confidence was visibly faltering. "Perhaps my client was mistaken about that particular instance." But Michael did not let him finish. "Your Honor, there is a pattern here. My client was accused of being in places she could not have been. She was accused of sending emails she did not write. Miss Reynolds is not a victim. She is the instigator of a deliberate and malicious attempt to destroy my client's reputation." Olivia suddenly shot up from her seat, her face red with anger. "This is insane. You are twisting everything. Daniel, tell them the truth." All eyes turned to Daniel. He shifted uncomfortably under the weight of the scrutiny. His hesitation spoke volumes. Judge Monroe leaned forward. "Mr. Carter, is there anything you would like to say at this time?" Daniel swallowed hard, his jaw tightening. He avoided Olivia's gaze and instead looked at the judge. I think I need to clarify something." His voice was quieter than before. Langston quickly interrupted. "Daniel, you do not have to say anything further without consulting." But Daniel shook his head. "No, I have to say this." The courtroom was silent. Daniel exhaled and looked at Sophia. For the first time since this nightmare began, his expression was not one of indifference. It was guilt. "I was not completely honest earlier," he admitted. "I never actually saw Sophia send those emails. I assumed she had because Olivia told me she was receiving them." Sophia felt her heart twist. He had blindly believed Olivia, without even questioning it. Judge Monroe's voice was firm. "So you have no personal knowledge of your ex-wife ever threatening Miss Reynolds?" Daniel shook his head. "No, I do not." A murmur spread through the courtroom. Olivia's expression twisted into a look of panic. "Daniel, what are you doing?" she hissed. Michael seized the moment. "Your Honor, given that the plaintiff's key witness has now admitted he had no real evidence against my client, and given the falsified email accusations, we formally request that this case be dismissed immediately." Judge Monroe looked at Olivia. "Miss Reynolds, do you have anything to say for yourself?" Olivia's hands balled into fists. "This is unfair. She deserved it. She ruined my life first." Sophia's mouth fell open. "I ruined her life?" Judge Monroe's face remained unreadable. "Bailiff, please remove Miss Reynolds from the courtroom until I make my ruling." As Olivia was escorted out, she shot Sophia a glare filled with hatred. "This is not over," she spat. Sophia remained silent, her body trembling. She had done nothing to deserve this, yet Olivia had gone to extreme lengths to punish her. Judge Monroe sighed and looked at the remaining people in the courtroom. I will review the evidence carefully before making my final ruling, but at this moment, the case against Mrs. Carter appears to be based on fabrication. I suggest everyone take a moment to consider what has transpired today. Michael leaned toward Sophia. We are winning this. Just hold on a little longer. But Sophia could not shake the feeling that Olivia was not finished with her yet. Sophia sat frozen in her seat, her heart pounding as the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. Olivia had been escorted out, but the weight of her parting words lingered in the air. This is not over. Sophia had fought hard to stay composed throughout the trial, but now she felt the first shiver of fear crawl up her spine. Olivia was unhinged. She had already fabricated evidence, dragged her name through the mud, and convinced Daniel to turn against her. What else was she capable of? Judge Monroe tapped her gavel, signaling for silence. We will take a short recess before I render my ruling. Court is adjourned for now. Michael turned to Sophia and placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You are doing great. We have practically dismantled their entire case. Sophia exhaled shakily. I know, but something does not feel right. Olivia will not let this go. Michael gave her a firm nod. Let us focus on the facts. She has been exposed, and we have proven that you are innocent. That is what matters. Sophia nodded, trying to absorb his confidence, but a knot of anxiety remained lodged in her stomach. As the courtroom cleared out, Daniel approached hesitantly. He looked different, less polished, less sure of himself. Sophia, he said, his voice laced with guilt. Can we talk? She lifted her chin. About what? How you stood in court and accused me of things I never did. Daniel winced. I know. I was wrong. I let Olivia convince me that you were obsessed with me. She made me believe you were out to ruin my life. He sighed. But now, after what happened today, I see how much I was manipulated. Sophia crossed her arms. And what exactly do you want from me, Daniel? Forgiveness. His eyes flickered with shame. No. I wanted you to know that I am sorry. I should have known better. You never deserved this. Sophia stared at him for a long moment. This was the man she had once loved, the man she had built a life with. But now, looking at him, all she felt was a deep, hollow sadness. He had chosen Olivia over her. He had believed the worst about her without hesitation. Apologies do not undo the damage, Daniel, she said quietly. But I do hope you have learned something from this. Daniel nodded, accepting her words. Before he could say anything else, the courtroom doors suddenly burst open. A police officer rushed in, his face tense. Judge Monroe, we have an urgent situation. The room went silent. Judge Monroe narrowed her eyes. What kind of situation? The officer hesitated before turning his gaze toward Sophia. It concerns Miss Reynolds. Sophia's breath caught in her throat. What about her? The officer stepped forward. She was found outside the courthouse just now, attempting to break into Mrs. Carter's car. She had a can of spray paint and what appears to be a knife. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Sophia felt her stomach churn. Oh my God. Judge Monroe's expression turned ice cold. Is she in custody? Yes, Your Honor, the officer confirmed. She resisted arrest and caused a scene, screaming that Mrs. Carter had ruined her life. Sophia's hands trembled. Michael immediately turned to the judge. Your Honor, this proves beyond any doubt that Miss Reynolds has been acting with malicious intent. She was not just lying in court. She is dangerous. Judge Monroe nodded solemnly. This changes everything. She turned to the bailiff. Bring Miss Reynolds into the courtroom immediately. A few minutes later, Olivia was escorted in, her wrists bound in handcuffs. Her once perfect hair was disheveled, and her eyes burned with fury. This is not fair, she screamed, thrashing against the officers holding her arms. She is the one who should be in handcuffs. She took everything from me. Sophia felt her throat tighten, but she refused to flinch. Olivia looked wild, unstable, completely unraveling in front of everyone. Judge Monroe's face was like stone. Miss Reynolds, do you realize what you have just done? You have not only destroyed your own credibility, but you have proven that this entire case was built on lies. Olivia let out a bitter laugh. You do not get it, do you? None of this is about the stupid lawsuit. She glared at Sophia. She took Daniel from me. She had him first, and no matter what I did, he always kept looking back at her. I wanted to break her the way she broke me. Daniel, who had remained silent until now, looked horrified. Olivia, what are you talking about? She turned on him with venom in her eyes. Oh, please, do you really think I loved you? You were just supposed to be a way to hurt her. But even when I had you, I could never get rid of the shadow of her. Olivia sneered at Sophia. Do you know how infuriating that was? No matter what I did, you still mattered to him. Sophia felt sick. Olivia had built her entire life around revenge, on a war Sophia had never even known she was part of. Judge Monroe shook her head. Miss Reynolds, you have just admitted to orchestrating a false case and attempting to harm the defendant. That, along with your behavior today, leaves me no choice. She turned to the officer. Take her into custody. I will be recommending formal charges for perjury, defamation, and attempted criminal damage. Olivia's face twisted in rage, but she had lost. The officers dragged her away, her screams echoing down the hallway. Sophia sat in stunned silence, her body heavy with exhaustion. It was over. The nightmare that had consumed her for months was finally over. Judge Monroe turned back to the courtroom. This case is dismissed. Mrs. Carter, you are free to go. Sophia barely heard the words. Relief flooded her, but so did something else. A deep, aching sadness. How had it come to this? Michael squeezed her shoulder. You did it. You stood your ground, and the truth won. Sophia nodded, though her heart felt heavy. She had won the case, but she had lost so much along the way. Her marriage, her peace, her trust in people she had once loved. As she stood to leave, Daniel approached her again, his face pale. Sophia, I had no idea she met his eyes, and this time, she felt no anger, only exhaustion. Goodbye, Daniel. With that, she turned and walked away, stepping into a future where Olivia's lies no longer had power over her. But as she left the courthouse, she could not shake the feeling that, in some way, this battle had only been the beginning. The courthouse doors swung shut behind Sophia, but the weight of everything that had transpired still pressed down on her. She had won. She was free. Yet, as she stepped into the cool afternoon air, the reality of what she had endured settled over her like a heavy fog. Michael walked beside her, silent for a moment before he spoke. Do you want to get a coffee? You should not be alone after everything. Sophia appreciated the concern, but she needed time to process. She shook her head gently. Thank you, Michael, but I think I just need to go home. He studied her face before nodding. Understood. But if you need anything, you know where to find me. With a small, grateful smile, she bid him goodbye and made her way to her car. The thought of Olivia standing here just hours ago, waiting to destroy something of hers, possibly even waiting to hurt her, sent a shiver through her. She checked the door handles, her instincts on high alert. Nothing seemed out of place, but when she opened the door, she hesitated before getting in. She was safe now, but the paranoia Olivia had instilled in her would not disappear overnight. As she drove home, the events of the past few months replayed in her mind. Daniel's betrayal, Olivia's twisted obsession, the way her life had been turned upside down. And yet, through it all, she had survived. Arriving at her apartment, she exhaled deeply. The familiar space felt foreign, like she was stepping into a different life, one that had existed before all of this. She dropped her keys on the kitchen counter and sank into the couch. For the first time in months, she had no court case to worry about. No threats lingering in her inbox. No false accusations looming over her. It was over, or at least it should have been. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. Her pulse spiked, but she forced herself to take a breath. It is just the delivery I ordered. she told herself. Nothing more. Still, when she looked through the peephole, her stomach twisted. Daniel. Sophia considered ignoring him, letting him stand there until he gave up. But something in his posture made her pause. He looked defeated. Against her better judgment, she opened the door, keeping her expression guarded. "What do you want, Daniel?" He sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "Can I come in?" She hesitated. Letting him into her space felt wrong after everything. But a part of her, perhaps the part that had once loved him, wanted closure. She stepped aside wordlessly, allowing him in. Daniel took a few steps inside, looking around as if seeing the apartment for the first time. "It has been a long time since I was here," he murmured. Sophia crossed her arms. "That was your choice." He nodded. "I know." Silence stretched between them. Then Daniel finally spoke. "I was an idiot." Sophia raised an eyebrow. "I could have told you that months ago." A sad smile flickered across his face before vanishing. "I let Olivia manipulate me. I thought she loved me, but I was just a tool for her to get to you." He looked down. "I was too blind to see it." Sophia swallowed the lump in her throat. "Did you ever stop to wonder why I never fought for you?" Daniel's head snapped up. "All those months, I never tried to stop you from leaving," she continued, her voice steady. "Because deep down, I knew something was wrong. I knew that if you could believe the worst about me so easily, then we were not meant to last." Daniel flinched, as if her words physically hurt him. "I hate that I proved you right." Sophia shook her head. "You did not just prove me right, Daniel. You broke something between us that can never be repaired." His shoulders sagged. "I do not expect you to forgive me. I needed to say it. I needed you to know that I am sorry." Sophia took a deep breath. She had spent so much time being angry, being hurt, being afraid. But now, looking at him, she just felt done. "I hope you learn from this," she said quietly. "I hope that next time, you choose to trust the person who actually loves you, instead of the one who just wants to use you." Daniel nodded, his eyes glassy. He looked like he wanted to say more, but instead, he turned toward the door. Before he left, he paused. "For what it is worth, I did love you, Sophia." She did not respond. When the door closed behind him, Sophia let out a shaky breath. She had needed that conversation more than she had realized. Not because she wanted Daniel back, but because it was the final piece in letting go. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly free. She poured herself a cup of tea, curling up on the couch with a blanket. There was no longer a court case hanging over her. No more Olivia lurking in the shadows. No more Daniel clouding her thoughts. Tomorrow she would wake up and begin again. Stronger, wiser, free. And that, she realized, was the best victory of all. The days after the trial felt eerily quiet. For months, Sophia had lived in a whirlwind of legal battles, betrayals, and fear. Now the silence felt almost unnatural. She woke up each morning expecting another disaster, another cruel twist orchestrated by Olivia. But there were no more threats, no more lies. Olivia was facing criminal charges, and Daniel, well, she did not know what Daniel was doing, nor did she care anymore. The wounds Olivia and Daniel had inflicted would take time to heal, but Sophia refused to let them define her. One morning, she sat by her apartment window, sipping tea as the sun painted the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. She allowed herself to feel the peace of the moment. You survived. The thought settled deep inside her. She had not just endured the storm, she had risen above it. A knock at the door startled her. Her heart leaped for a split second, but she forced herself to breathe. Not everyone knocking at your door is a threat. She walked over and checked the peephole. Relief washed over her. It was Michael. Sophia opened the door with a smile. "Michael, what brings you here?" He held up a brown paper bag. "Breakfast. Thought you could use some company." She stepped aside to let him in. "You always seem to know what I need before I do." He grinned. "It is a skill." They settled at the dining table, and Sophia unwrapped a warm croissant. For the first time in what felt like forever, she ate without the weight of anxiety sitting on her chest. Michael studied her carefully. You look lighter today. She nodded, chewing thoughtfully. I feel lighter. I did not realize how much Olivia and Daniel had taken from me. Not just in court, but emotionally. Now that they are out of my life, I finally feel like I can breathe again. Michael leaned back in his chair. That is the thing about toxic people. They drain you so gradually that you do not realize how much of yourself you are losing, until they are gone. Sophia sighed. It is strange. I spent years with Daniel, convinced he was my future. And now, looking back, I see how blind I was. He never truly saw me, not the way he should have. Michael tilted his head. And now, she met his gaze. Now I am seeing myself, and I am realizing I am worth more than the way he treated me. A slow smile spread across Michael's face. That is what I was hoping to hear. Sophia smiled back, warmth blooming in her chest. She did not know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she was excited to find out. The weeks passed, and Sophia began reclaiming her life. She returned to her work, reconnected with old friends, and indulged in simple joys she had neglected. Reading in coffee shops, going for long walks, filling her home with fresh flowers. One afternoon, she stood in front of the mirror, studying her reflection. She looked the same, yet she felt entirely different. The woman staring back at her was not just a survivor. She was stronger, wiser, and free. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from Michael. Dinner tonight? I found a new place you will love. Sophia's lips curled into a smile as she typed back. Sounds perfect. As she grabbed her coat and stepped outside, she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. Her story was not over. In fact, it was just beginning. And this time, she was writing it on her own terms.